Thank you, Glenn. Hello to all my friends this is the Lunch Bunch group in Greeneville, Tennessee, but I see people from all over the United States. That's what I love about Zoom meetings. So from wherever you're Zooming from, hello to everybody. Glenn put in all this hard work. Every time I get to do this, I'm amazed at the structure that we have on these Zoom meetings, and guys like Glenn put these things together, and they are so formatted. It's like being in your own home group, the heartbeat of AA. I love this. I love a strict formatted home group that stays according to their format under the guidelines of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's if we stay true to our nature and what is the written word, then I don't think we're ever gonna fail. Because I was at my home group this morning at 8 o'clock. I'm on Central Time in Florida. We're like in the redneck Riviera over in Destin, way over in the Panhandle, halfway between Pensacola Beach and Panama City Beach. And my darling bride and I get to live in this little white sand right here. And we have a marvelous view, and she celebrated 31 years in Al-Anon yesterday. And so I'm having a great time. We have a whole family most of the family's full of recovery. And I think my name is Chip and I'm an alcoholic, but I'm so much more than that. I actually stayed here long enough to become an ANDA. So I'm an alcoholic and a loving husband. I'm an alcoholic and a loving son. I'm an alcoholic and a loving brother. And I'm really an alcoholic and a loving grandparent of 11 grandchildren, one of whom is staying with us during the summertime and working for my construction business. And the biggie is that I'm an alcoholic and a trusted friend to many of the guys, especially the guys that I sponsor. So I'm definitely so much more than what I came in, the package that I brought into Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is the 22nd of November, 1987. So it's about 33 years and coming up on 6 months. So my home group is Busters for Sobriety. We meet in the harbor right there at Callahan's Steakhouse. And we meet, I tell people, we meet every day of the week because we have to. If we don't, the Destin police is going to have to hire more people. We have a bunch of crazy alcoholics. We average about 38 to 50 people every morning, and we're a destination capital, the luckiest little fishing village in the Gulf of Mexico. So during the summertime and also during the fishing tournament during the month of October, we can go all the way up to about 80 people from all over the world. So it's kind of like Friends of Bill W. meeting in Disney World. When you go there every day, you never know who's going to be meeting and who's going to be speaking. I got a sponsor by the name of Jerry W. He now lives in Omaha, Nebraska. He just moved from Jacksonville, Florida. He's been my sponsor. I changed sponsors at 28 years. So Jerry's been my sponsor for the last, since 2015. And I get to sponsor guys from, I'm going to give Big Al a cake at the end of this month. On the 27th, he'll have 33 years. I'm 8 months ahead of him. So I've been sponsoring him for most all this time, all the way down to a guy with 10 and a half months. And it's, my entire life has just been a roller coaster of fun and trauma and drama. And it's, I'm a retired Air Force guy. I retired when I was 7 years sober from the Air Force in 1994. I gave them 20 years, 10 months, and 4 days of Air Force. And so thank you to the veterans that are out there. And in 1994, when I retired, I opened a construction business that I still have today. I don't do any new construction. I work on rental property. So you can imagine the volume of work we have in this resort called Destin. I have 3 children, and Angie, my Al-Anon bride, has 1 child, and a lot of y'all might have heard her. She just celebrated 30 years of sobriety. It's Amanda Magnolia B. from Montgomery, Alabama, who's the love of my life. And we have one adopted son of the heart named John, and I'll be speaking at his home group in Mobile, Alabama, the Legacies group tonight. And we did what we call the AA adoption, and that was that we were friends for a long time, and we were standing in the buffet line at the Gulf Shores Jubilee one day, and he started talking to me and Angie about wanting to make amends to his parents who were gone. And, and my Al-Anon bride and her perfect serenity turned around and looked and said, well, John, we'll be your parents. And we adopted him right there in the buffet line. And you can do anything you want in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't have any rules. So it's nothing's in writing. I have grandchildren from 26 years old down to 3. I have a sister who's 67, a brother who's 58, And the reason I tell you this, and Mom and Dad, I'm going to be with my father for Father's Day. I'm leaving Friday to go back to Jacksonville, 5.5 hours away, to spend yet one more Father's Day with my dad. He'll be 93 at the end of July. And my mother just yesterday turned, on my wife's birthday, my mother turned 91 years old. So I'm going to get to be with them for Father's Day weekend. So what are we doing here to the people that are counting their first year days and stuff like that? What do we do when we get up here and do this? I know you've been to other speaker meetings and stuff like that. And my sponsor has me follow the exact guidelines of what we're supposed to do. In the big book, it writes it out exactly what we're supposed to do. It doesn't say we're supposed to talk to you about puking or volumes of blood that we lost or car crashes, although we do some of that to qualify. On page 29 of our big book, it says each individual in their personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. And to me, that's the most important thing that I get to talk about. And I want to make sure I leave enough time because, I can remember sitting there in some speaker meetings and they would talk for an hour and about 45 minutes were about drinking. And I'm an expert drinker. I'm a professional drinker. And I got ribbons and awards. They're called scars from going through windshields at high speeds. So this is my story. I think it's the best story I've ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous because it's mine. And what happened is Bill Wilson granted me this power. And you know what? He granted the same power to Glenn and the same power to Carol. Hey, Carol, good seeing you again. And all these, everybody in this room and everybody sober in Alcoholics Anonymous has been granted the same power. And it's written out in our book. It says on page 124, you can avert death and misery for other people. That's an enormous responsibility with that power. You can avert death and misery, right? So on page 124, it says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession that you have. The key to life and death and happiness for others. See how Bill slides that in there? We get a great possession and then we're supposed to do something with it, like save somebody's life. So here's what happens. When it's your turn to get up and talk, all you can do is tell your story. You cannot change it. You cannot embellish it. You cannot make it more popular. There is no speaker sponsor academy that you go to learn how to talk or sponsor people. There's no secret clique of, he's a circuit speaker, so they're on a higher plateau. There's just your story. And the neat thing is I don't have to win the approval of any judges. Blake Shelton is not sitting there in the audience getting ready to smack his hand with Christina Aguilar. And I don't have to get anybody's approval. It's just my story. So my story, I was raised the son of a naval officer who used to be enlisted and he became an officer because he worked hard 8 years of night school back in the 50s and 60s. That dates it, right? No internet, no Google. He had to have tutors and stuff like that. He was born and raised in Peekskill, New York. I call him a mountain man. He was born in 1928, the great generation. So we still call him the commander. He retired as a Navy commander in 1973, and we still call my mother the Lady Mary, who was the wife of a naval officer. And we traveled the world in the Navy, and during my teenage years, I was raised in Key West and Cuba, back and forth. That base down there that nobody wants to talk about, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That's why I graduated high school in 1972. So we would go back and forth. So all my formative years, as Wonder Bread used to call it, that was my pre-professional drinking years. My trial and error years were all done in Guantanamo Bay and in Key West. So that's when I was doing my little teenage drinking and stuff like that. But I never got in any really bad issues. I never got caught with anything. So but in 1969 or 67 to 69, for the people in my area, you'll remember that as the Woodstock years of 1969, where there's dope, there's hope, burned down City Hall. And they always said, if you were raised in Key West in the 60s and you remember it, you did not participate. So I was in Mary Immaculate High School. I started my little drinking episodes and it started to get the attention of the nuns. In 1971, we went back to Cuba, and now I'm getting ready to graduate high school. And then I started getting the attention of the Shore Patrol from the Navy police there. And then I started working construction when I graduated in 1972. So you see there's a little progression that's going on. And that's where I started learning from the construction guys, the manly men, how to do that. We don't even use this term anymore. Little hair of the dog that bit you. You know, you get up in the morning and you got the blood, your eyes are bleeding, your teeth are itching, your head hurts. You can feel your hair growing. You knock down a couple shooters, brings you right back up to normal again, and off you go to work. That's when I started learning how to do that. And the morning drink would come into play, and everything was good. Dad retired in 1973. We came back to the United States. I joined the Air Force. And that's when I started my military phase of my drinking. And then it started escalating. I escaped a lot of trouble downtown because I had a military ID card on top of my driver's license. So every time I got pulled over, they'd see the military ID card, give me an escort back to the main gate. And so I got out of a lot of stuff. I can remember when I sobered up, I told my sponsor, but I can't be an alcoholic. I never got a DUI. He said, well, Chip, how many times did you get pulled over? And I said, next question. Always want to jump to the next question. So I'm not really sure where I crossed the invisible line into alcoholism, but I surely wanted to know. At some point in my drinking career, I began to consume too much alcohol. Like Ray Melbaum would say in Long Beach, California, I was either getting drunk or getting off of drunk. I had to control my drinking. I had to, because I had a military career I was going to give up if I didn't. And so I would start getting through these episodes. I ended up getting married. I got married for the first time at the Wee Chapel of Love on Gandy Boulevard. The police were involved, so that's another whole talk. And my history started growing like that. I met wife number 2 in the middle of a car chase when I was trying to get divorced from wife number 1, and she was behind us chasing us. Anyhow, this is a magic. I'm gonna skip to the magic of what Bill Wilson says. 13 years after they published the big book, they published the 12 and 12. And it talked all about me in the 12 and 12 and my relationship with other people, with friends, acquaintances, wives. Page 53 of the 12 and 12. But it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. And here's the kicker. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. And what did that mean to me? If you liked me, I would hurt you. If you loved me, I would hurt you over and over and over again until you left. And I never meant to be that way, but that's just the way that it was. My parents didn't understand me. You know, they just celebrated 70 years of marriage. My parents never understood me. I was always in and out of these relationships and marriages, right? In my second marriage, we had these 3 little children. And these are the children that I dragged through the destruction of my alcoholism. Nothing funny. I don't give any Al-Anon jokes, because when I did my inventory, I found there was nothing funny to what I did to that wife and those 3 children. My wife was baffled by the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and they would always try to figure out what type of mood that I was in when I came home, and they would either run to the rooms or they would run to my legs and hug me, depending on what I looked like. At the end of my run in 1987, these children were 11, 10, and 8 years old. And they really suffered. Thank God for a program called Alateen and Al-Anon. I'd come to in the middle of the night and I was seeing shadow people. I was beginning to have medical problems. I was seeing the doctor. I had extreme weight gain, anxiety attacks. And in 1987, I had 3 trips to the emergency room in rapid succession. And then when they went back to the records, all 3 of these trips to the emergency room were for alcohol poisoning. The Air Force does not condone stuff like that. They, on the last trip, they locked me up. It was April the 26th, 1987. They put me in a nut ward and they detoxed me. That's not my sobriety date. My sobriety date is the 22nd of November, 1987. So I came out of that nut ward after they detoxed me. I did not go to alcohol treatment. I talked my way through it. I was a senior non-commissioned officer. I thought I had so much responsibility that the Air Force would fall apart if I wasn't out there running those crews. And they mandated that I go to AA meetings and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I went to these AA meetings stark raving sober. What I didn't tell anybody was that I could not stand being sober. I would just want to sit in the meetings and just, put up my armor, my shield. I'm fine. Thank you very much. You don't need to convince me of anything. And what I was I was a prey to misery and depression. Alcohol was the only thing that let me cope with life and the family. So I could stay all right for 1 hour during the day at an AA meeting, but then I would go home and terrorize those kids and that wife. And at work, I was a Tasmanian. I was, I was a terror. That's why I made rank so fast. So it's after doing that for 6 months and 3 weeks, I felt I could no longer stand to be sober because I couldn't stand the people that were around. I made a conscious decision to go back out and drink again. And I drank for 3 days. And you talk about confused. I was waiting for the bomb to go off. And later I learned the lesson I was supposed to learn. Clancy used to say, it doesn't mean that you're going to die right after you take the first drink. It means you're going to start to hear something. It's going to sound like a ticking, like a clock. And what that is a time bomb. You never know when it's going to explode. You never know who you're going to take out while that clock is ticking, right? So I went to this old timer that got sober in 66, and I said, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not. And he said the 5 magic words that I've been looking for 6 months and 3 weeks, but never heard. He said, if you were like me. And you see, I'd gone to meetings for 6 months and 3 weeks looking for people that sounded like me, like I felt. And I wasn't hearing it. It was called selective hearing. They were talking about putting the plug in the jug, and their life was wonderful. The kids all loved them to death. The puppies came and sat on their lap, brought them the evening newspaper. God gave them the winning numbers to the lot. My life was miserable when I was sober. My coper was broke, and I just didn't know how to react. And I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? And he said, well, if you're just like me, he said, if you remember my story, and he got sober September 21st, 1966 for the last time. So this September, we're going to give him a 55-year medallion. This is the guy that was my sponsor the first 28 years. Johnny H's oldest baby, right? So he said, if you're like me, you remember my story. It took me 4.5 years to lock in a final sobriety day, in and out, in and out, in and out. I said, oh, yeah. He said, you left after 6 months and 3 weeks. I said, yeah. He said, well, Chip, he said, maybe if you're like me, maybe if your drinking didn't prove your alcoholism, maybe your sobriety will. And I thought for a moment, and it was dead silence. And I said, can you say that again? He said, maybe if your drinking did not prove your alcoholism, maybe your sobriety will. And I said, well, I don't understand what you mean. He said, Chip, he said, if you're not an alcoholic and you stop drinking, nothing's going to happen. But if you are a real alcoholic and you start drinking, all kinds of things are going to start happening. It's going to get real. It's going to get real different. And then it's going to get absolutely crazy. And he said, your mind's going to start telling you things. You're going to start hearing. All these things that he said came true, right? He told me the truth. So he started taking me to people that I could listen to and understand what they were saying, because they would always lead it back up to the big book. I couldn't understand Bill Wilson's hot flash and his, standing across the graveyard and the tombstone and whether they died by whiskey or pot and musket or pot. And I'm like, I never got that hot flash like you did in the town's hospital. So he took me to people that could answer my questions, because I wasn't sure if I was an alcoholic or not. And remember, I thought that you had to absolutely surrender to being an alcoholic, to occupy your seat and become a home group member. And boy, did I learn something different. He took me to Mac Brewster out to West Covina, right? The 502 Club. He got sober 9 months before the sponsor did in 66, right? And he says, Chip, if you're like me, maybe you became an alcoholic when you quit bragging about how much booze you drank and started lying about how much you really did. And I heard this bomb go off in my head. And then I heard another guy say, I drank just enough alcohol for the I don't give a darn light to come on. I didn't give a darn about the kids. I didn't give a darn about the job. You get just enough alcohol in me and those nuts and bolts tighten down. All the engine cylinders start smoothing out and they're firing smoothly. But the big one was when I came back, and this lady that was my home group member, her name was Rose. She got up to the podium and she said, alcohol gave me a license to act in an unsociable manner and excuse it off by saying, I am so sorry. I would not have done that if I hadn't been drinking. And man, did I relate to that. I don't know how many times I used that excuse with those children and those wives. I'm sorry, honey. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. Those children over and over again. I'm sorry, Daddy's not like that when he's not drinking. You know me, I just drank a little bit too much. And I remember when I was in California, Cliff Roach would always say, I didn't drink for the effect. I drank for the effect 8 minutes and 40 seconds into my drinking. that's when the nuts and bolts would tighten down. First, I had to get them down. Then I had to get them to stay down. I remember going and hearing Dr. Smith's son, Smitty, the Al-Anon. He spoke at the Palm Springs banquet at the Palm Springs Roundup. And he said, just don't leave 5 seconds before your miracle happens. It's about to come. Just don't leave. And see, that's what I had done at 6 months and 3 weeks. I don't know what miracle was waiting around the corner, but I drank instead, and I drank for 3 days, right? So I had to learn all these lessons, and they locked me in. So my sobriety proved my alcoholism a whole lot more. And as I started taking my inventory, there became tangible evidence of my alcoholism right there written in my inventory. So my sobriety proved it by the way that I felt when I was sober. See, the big book only asked me 2 questions, right? If, there's this 40-question test you can take. Some people have 20 questions, and the big book brings it down to 2 questions. This was written in 1939, published in 39. If, on page 44, if, when you honestly want to, you find that you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. And what a game changer that is. I don't need to convince anybody. I don't have to have an alcoholic resume. I don't need to break it down into wishbone diagrams, right? And then I had people would break me into the second step. I said, you don't need to talk to me about this God of my understanding or something like that. Or I just need to talk to you about this insanity thing. I know you want me to admit that I'm clinically insane. And the old timer said, well, haven't you been to the nut ward? And I said, yeah, but that doesn't count. It was only 10 days. And he said, what are you afraid of? I said, I'm not clinically insane. I am a senior I got responsibility. He said, why do you think they meant clinically insane? I said, well, look at the words, restore me to sanity. And this is the same thing that has happened to me in 33 and a half years. They constantly take you back to, even Jerry today, let's go back to the big book and see what Bill meant. Oh man, that, can't you come up with a better answer than that? No. So then he takes me to the big book and he says, let's find out what Bill Wilson was talking about when it comes to insanity, right? So here's my book, and it says, page 36, we're talking about Jim and that ounce of whiskey in his milk. Thus started one more journey to the asylum. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of the intense suffering, right? Which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Okay. Yet all reasons for drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. Next sentence, here it comes, the kicker. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. And he doesn't stop there. Next paragraph. But there was always a curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. And then they talk about the jaywalkers, right? But even in the type of beginning, we're obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient. Every single step I took, he made me take it by the big book in hand. Big book in one hand, 12 and 12 in another hand. And I said, but I'm not, what about this big delay thing on the thing about the alcoholism and stuff like that? I mean, they said the idea that it has to be snatched. I said, I'm on the 4th step and I still want to argue about the 1st step. And I need tangible evidence. So then he takes me back to the 12 and 12 in the forward that nobody reads. I thought you had to be and accept and admit your total defeat in alcoholism in order to work the rest of the steps. This is what Bill wrote. Page 15 in the forward to the 12 and 12. AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the user to become happily and usefully whole. I repeat that. The 12 steps can expel the obsession to drink. And that's what happened to me. That's why I believe they talk about the spiritual experience and the educational variety. These taking of these 12 steps over and over and over again slowly expelled that obsession to drink. I got through all the steps. I got through the craziness of the 4th step, 27 pages of autobiography. Didn't need to be that way. Norm Alpe would say, you can take your entire inventory and put it on a 3x5 index card, baby. Rationalizer, justifier, compromiser, liar, cheater, and a thief. And that would be it. But no, I had to write everything down and explain why I did everything, why they caused me. Anyhow, I got through all that stuff, and I worked all the 12 steps, and slowly I started to change. I'm sponsoring people, which was the greatest turbocharge I ever found in Alcoholics Anonymous. Anytime anything's going on in my life, this guy will walk up and say, would you help me out? And whatever it is I was going through gets turbocharged resolution. I don't know how that happens. I believe that's just a connecting of the dots, right? I remember Johnny would always say, this is all these 12 steps, and the way they're designed is all transportation by God in a vehicle called Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how we're supposed to get it. We just keep trying to work the steps and help people. So I'd worked all these 12 steps, right? And then on the 12th step, I got kind of confused because it says, we haven't had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I said, okay, but look at all the stuff that I've gone through, right? Year 10, I get a divorce from wife number 2. The children thought that I divorced them. It was a gut-wrenching divorce. I waited till the youngest child was 18 years old, and it was a terrible divorce. I ended up living in this dilapidated mobile home for 2.5 years, trying to recover my finances and stuff like that, and try to patch everything back together with the children. And I'm thinking, where's the spiritual awakening I keep hearing about and stuff, you know? And then I was single and sober and serene for 2.5 years. I dated a girl in my home group. We got married, and then that lasted for 13 years. Boom, year 24. I'm like, I had this massive heart attack. I had taken this construction company that I started to the next level, and I was determined. But that money, material, and mansions were my mantra. I'm working 20 hours a day trying to keep all this stuff together and get all these fancy cars. I had Corvettes and Mercedes sports cars in the garages, and I am becoming everything that, you know, I thought I was a poster child. It says, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. And my question that I never asked anybody was this: what's it supposed to feel like? I know that I've worked the 12 steps. I've been sober a long time now, whatever year it was, I was asking these questions. But what am I supposed to feel like? I don't feel different. Am I supposed to feel different? Where did I hit the spiritual awakening? Where was it? It's like the invisible line to alcoholism. If I was an alcoholic and I crossed the invisible line, where was it? What was I drinking? What was I doing? Where was I at? Who was I married to? I needed to know, if I have a spiritual awakening, when did it happen? Because I don't really feel, everybody talks about what the book says, that God is now doing for us what we could not do on our unaided abilities alone. I understand that, but nobody was talking about what it felt like. I'm 33 years, 5 months, and some odd days sober. I can tell you what it feels like now, because I had that spiritual awakening at a deeper level because of the catastrophe that happened in my license, right? So I question people now when I talk about it, because I've been through all the roller coasters. You know, at year 2.5, screaming the third step prayer at God, because I knew I was going to drink again. And I was just screaming at God. And I would go to the old timer and say, this doesn't work, because in effect, sometimes a great one's supposed to be felt at once. And he said, Chip, what did you expect? Do you expect to scream and yell at God to relieve you of the bondage of self and take away your difficulties and go home and find a Corvette in the driveway? Is that what you expect? What do you want God to do, Chip? You're an alcoholic, right? And I said, yeah. He said, you told me you were that close to drinking, 2.5 years sober. Yeah. He said, did you drink? I said, no, but what's that got to do with anything? He said, what were you looking for? That's where I had to set my expectations up on what God will really do for me, because God expects me to do all this work, right? Everything that I went through with all these different varieties would always change all these expectations that I had of God. And I knew Angie for 14 years before we ever started dating and getting engaged. And I used to listen to her and Amanda go to these conferences and do this AA and Al-Anon duet. And even today, when Angie speaks, she will always say, God expects me to do the work, and then let him know when I'm done. Okay, God, I've done what you asked. What mission do you have for me now? That's the way she puts it. And you better hold on, because God will give you a mission. Okay, you ready? Here we go. And so I started launching off on all these different things and these activities and stuff. And I had that terrible heart attack, the widowmaker, when I was 24 years sober, married to a girl in my home group. I thought life was great. And it was, and the doctors told me I had to have a total change in lifestyle because I was so stressed out trying to maintain all that stuff that I was curdling my blood with cholesterol, turning it into cottage cheese. So I did. I changed my lifestyle. I slowed everything down. 8 months after that heart attack, I got another divorce. I wasn't expecting it. It's just something that happened. And it about killed me emotionally. I thought we had a Camelot marriage. Boy meets girl on AA campus. We've been married for 13 years now. Everything was grand, Both of us had accelerated in our careers where we were so busy, we kind of faded apart. And once I got through that divorce, I left the courthouse and she went off to the right when we got at the bottom of the stairs and I went off to the left. And that was just prior to my 25th year sober, my 25th birthday. And in the pickup truck in the parking lot was my sponsor and a bunch of the guys that he sponsored. They had my bags all packed. They put me in the truck and they took me to Panama City to see Clancy, who was my great-grand sponsor. Clancy was speaking at a conference in Panama City, and they locked me in a hotel room and they made me take an inventory on just relationships. My relationships. Remember that thing that Bill wrote? It is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society that we have been especially stupid and stubborn. I had never targeted my defects of character and my shortcomings to the way I was with other people. Remember, if you liked me, I hurt you. If you loved me, I kept hurting you over and over again. And I had 3 divorces. And I'm like, I don't understand why this is happening. And they forced me to take an inventory and go back to what Sandy Beach says, the greatest hidden steps that Bill ever wrote. And that was steps 6 and 7. I had to learn this expressively when it comes to the subject of relationships, what my defects of character were and my shortcomings were. And I had to take a strict inventory on that. And I can tell you quickly, the speed reading concept of how they made me do it. Because I was just about to celebrate 25 years and I'm sitting locked up in a hotel room with my sponsor. And he gives me a legal pad and he says, step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. He said, take this pad and write down defects of character on the top, step 6. And I said, I know what that is. He said, write it down. Underneath it, I want you to write this, things that I did I never should have done. I'm like, where's that in the big book? He said, keep writing. Things that I did that I never should have done, defects of character. Those were tangible. Those are the things that I got divorced because of. Those are the things that I got arrested because of. Things that I did that I never should have done. He said, now on this legal pad, I want you to write down this. 7th step, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. I said, it means the same thing. He said, write it down. He said, underneath the word shortcomings, I want you to write this. Things that I should have been doing that I never did. So I had to look at everything that I did that I never should have done and write down things that I should have done instead. In other words, the exact opposite of the defects that I was committing, or our sins, as Bill says it, the 7 deadly sins. And he said, let me ask you this, when it comes to these children, I said, yeah. I said, I had made alcoholic orphans and widows. I totally disregarded them. I worked, I drank. He said, then what happened when you came into AA? I said, then I made AA widows and AA orphans. I hadn't changed, you see. I had not changed. Now I'm running and I'm going to AA meetings. I'm running and I'm going to AA conferences. I'm flying out to Hawaii with my sponsor. And I'm going to the annual conventions in Hawaii. I'm going all over the place. And you know who's sitting at home? That wife and those children. I was like that when I drank. Now I'm like that when I'm sober. And then it got worse. And then as I started succeeding in business, then I started making business widows, business orphans. I am 20 hours a day. I don't have time for this. Leave me the heck alone. And I didn't realize that I was like that. So he said, that's your shortcomings. What should you have done instead? So I took it item by item. What should I have done with those wives instead? I should have applied more time to the relationship and let them know that they were loved, give them tangible evidence. What about the children? I had to go through every single shortcoming and tell him what I should have done instead. And I'm here to tell you, when I celebrated my 25th year, a couple of weeks later, I was a different man. I was a completely different man. Why do we go through all this stuff? Because God does not allow us to see the future. He sure does let us try and predict it though, right? That magic magnifying mind. I believe I had to go through all those things and get all that scar tissue from all that pain so that I would be ready when it came to Angie. We were friends for 14 years. On the 8th of March, 2014, I was single, sober, and serene. I still had all that stuff. She left it with all the divorce. I had a house on a lake, an island in the middle of the lake, and life was good, single, sober, and serene. I had sworn off relationships. My sponsor asked me to take him to the Flint River Roundup in Albany, Georgia. And I ended up going there, not because I wanted to. He had me move back closer to home and get back in with the herd at the home group. And so I went, and Amanda called me up, and she said, I need you to do something. I need you to come to Flint River and bring a suit. And I'm like, oh, you know how the ego is. You want me to speak somewhere, right? And she said, no, I want you to read. I'm hosting a meeting at the Roundup, and I need you to read for me. So bring a suit. And by the way, my mama's going to be there. I can't connect the dots. Amanda, let me try. Amanda was my ex-wife's sponsor. That's how I knew Amanda intimately. She would stay at my house all the time, go stay at the lake house all the time. They'd work steps, go to conventions. So I knew Amanda like she was almost my own daughter. She knew a lot about me from sponsoring my former spouse. And what happened was she played Cupid with me and her mother at Flint River Roundup on the 8th of March, 2014. I don't know how to connect the dots or forecast the future, but 180 days later, after I sent her mother a text at that Roundup, we hugged. We have a picture on our refrigerator where we hugged. 180 days later, we were married. That was September the 8th, exactly 180 days after we stood on stage together at the Roundup. So I don't know how to forecast all that stuff. I just go with the flow. Remember, tell God when you're ready. I'm done working these steps in that inventory. I'm ready for a mission. Boy, did he lay one on me. So we've been happily married ever since then. The ups and downs of marriage with two people in recovery. Angie would always say it when the alcoholic and an Al-Anon get together. We have the same literature, but we speak different languages. I might be speaking French. She might be speaking Chinese. I talk alcoholism and she talks Al-Anonism. And sometimes they line up, but other times they're just totally different viewpoints of things. And that's okay. It creates for great conversation and sometimes heated. And I had sworn off all those defects and shortcomings, but I'm telling you, life is life. I can remember when we were, and I want to fess up on this, we were our first so-called heated argument. I remember Angie looked up at me. That'll give you one hint. She looked up at me and she stopped me in the middle of my ranting because it was getting heated. And she stopped me and she said, will you do me one favor? And I said, what's that? She said, will you quit towering over top of me, talking down to me while we're having a conversation? And it got dead silent. Two people with long-term recovery added up over 50 some years together. And I suddenly realized that I had gone back into old behaviors that I had said were offensive in those inventories of the shortcomings and the defects. And you know the message, if you're still doing it, it ain't old behavior. It's still current. I had to make a call to my sponsor. And I have learned all these lessons since all this stuff happened. It's great practice. They always say that, you know, being in a marriage and a relationship with people in recovery is like putting Miracle-Gro on all your character defects. It gives you an opportunity to excel. And then you find out that you have an opportunity to achieve more happiness than you could ever imagine. We went through some really big up and downs, and we stayed together. And with my children and the things that my children have done, we have blended families, right? And it gets a little crazy sometimes. And but I can tell you that when Angie stood by me, I only got a few minutes left. In the year 2019, I started falling apart physically. So here's the down quick and dirty of it. By the time COVID had arrived, by the time COVID was even, I was sitting in Las Vegas on the 7th day after the 4th operation. So the doctor told me, you're going to go. I know you're going to go. You're going to go to State Line. Go ahead and go. But don't jump out of any moving airplanes at a high altitude. I had had 4 major surgeries in the 12-month span of time. Both carotid arteries were taken out, cut, clean, put back in. Both shoulders had gotten rebuilt. So I had been through 4 different anesthesias, 4 different painkiller regimens, 4 different ventilators. I was a mess. Well, I took off and I went with this great big bandage on my neck from the final one to State Line, and something happened. I suddenly realized I didn't have any strength anymore. When I came back from State Line, I went back and people would ask me, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know. And what happened was on the 3rd of March, one person in the States had died according to on COVID. On the 3rd of March, in February, one person had died. In March, COVID took off rampant. Everybody was scared to death. We were all crazy. On the 3rd of March, I ended up with another heart attack, a massive heart attack. I had suffered the widowmaker, the stroke makers with the carotid arteries being so blocked up it wouldn't push anything into my brain, oxygen deprivation. I ended up having a quadruple bypass 8 weeks after they did the last surgery. And so that's 5 major surgeries, and then COVID kicked off. But you know what happened? On the 3rd of March, I went into the hospital. A lot of people run Zoom down. I want to tell you what Zoom did for me in the last 7 minutes I got, right? Here's what Zoom did. I went into the hospital in the emergency room on the 3rd of March. On the 6th of March, I'm one of the old timers in my home group. On the 6th of March, one of my home group members with a year of sobriety, they tasked him with starting an online Zoom meeting. On the 9th of March, they ran a skill saw up my body, cracked me open like a coconut, stopped my heart for 4 hours, did a quadruple bypass, stapled me back together again. On the 10th of March, the next day, they opened up a laptop on my chest, signed me into my home group meeting, and told me don't share. They had just squeezed the Dilaudid back into the IV. Don't share, Jim. Just listen. I was on medical quarantine for a year because of the 5 major surgeries. I was so, vulnerable that I couldn't even leave the house. They came into the house, all the nursing care and stuff like that, masked up, gowned up. Because of COVID, because of people in my home group, because of Zoom, now I'm sitting here, I get to speak all over the world, but I get to attend meetings all over the world. I'm a better attender than I am a speaker, right? So I never missed a lick because of the people that assigned all this stuff and the people that took what God gave us as far as limited technology. Do you realize that 1 year before COVID, a Chinese immigrant released Zoom to the populace? Before it was just the military and business. 1 year prior, this guy released Zoom to the population. 5 years prior, we were all in Atlanta at the International Convention. And what was the theme of Atlanta? Anonymity in the digital age. In 2001, they published the 4th edition, which talks about modem to modem, face to face. Internet meetings are the same as regular meetings. And in 2020, God gave us the ability to practice it and said, take this and run with it and see what you can do. What an amazing group of 2 million people that put all this stuff together again. We had no idea that this thing was going to hit, but it's the people like Glenn and the ditch diggers that do these Zoom meetings that put all this stuff together. The people like Mike and Amat Audio and all these other people that we know, Lee and man, we have lost some giants during this entire pandemic period of time. We lost their bodies, but we get to keep hearing their message because we keep having people record this. It would have been so easy for us just to lay down, just to absolutely lay down and go, we'll wait till it's over and then we'll go back to meetings. But no, somebody mentioned the word Zoom and then they contacted New York. You know what New York was doing? Have you ever been to GSO? It's an amazing place to visit. go visit. You get to stand up at the podium and speak at our headquarters, right, at the noon meeting on Fridays, and they give you a buffet. Woo-hoo. And then you get to go to stepping stones. It's a lot of, it's so much fun. It's fun. It's an adventure, right? You know what New York was doing when all this stuff went crazy? Everybody's contacting them going, what do we do about this crazy Zoom people? You know, they're breaking our end, they're doing this, they're doing that. And at the same time, New York had to figure out, are we going to shut down Detroit or are we going to not shut down Detroit? Thousands of people had pre-registered, all the hotels, all that 5 years worth of work, which 5 years prior to that they started. New York was busy. And they weren't even in the office on Riverside. They were working like we're doing out of our homes. Thank God for the people that love Alcoholics Anonymous and the Al-Anons that love Al-Anon enough and all the other recovery people that keep this thing going in spite of the worst thing that got thrown at us. We turned into the very best thing. And it's because of the A-type personalities that we have. They always told me this when I started a business. There are those that own a business and there are those that work for the owner of the business. What type do you want to be? And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I finally got over all that crap that I went through, am I or am I not, and analysis paralysis and all that, they asked me, Chip, what type of alcoholic do you want to be? Do you want to be the guy sitting back in the corner? Angie always says it when she talks. If you order the supreme pizza, the waiter comes up and says, I'll have the supreme pizza. And he starts to walk away and you go, wait a minute. Bring me the supreme pizza without the stuff on it. If I'm going to be an alcoholic, I want the supreme pizza with everything on it. Like she said, I want to run my fingers across that empty plate and get every last bit of it. And why is that? Because I'm somebody special? No, because I hang with people that are special. I hang with the winners in Alcoholics Anonymous. To the people that are new, grab somebody's belt loop and run with them. Everything I learned from people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sponsors, these guys, Jerry's got 40, coming up on 45 years. He's an amazing man. And he taught me things about God that I had never, ever imagined at year 28. You never stop learning in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's because of people like you and little Greeneville, Tennessee at the lunch group, that I led the lunch bunch group. I just get to hang out and be who I am. And I can tell you the truth, and I don't care whether you like my story or not, because I want to hear yours, because I want to like yours. So thank you, Glenn. Thank you for asking me. I love all y'all, and I hope to be able to see you as we trudge the road, because we're going back to face-to-face conventions. Yeehaw!